So today we're going to talk about maintenance of your kitchen knife. Now, a good kitchen knife is probably the most important piece of equipment that you're going to invest in. So therefore, regular maintenance is pretty darn important. Just off the top, before we do anything, we're going to talk about just the very basics of maintaining your knife. And that would include, of course, washing it by hand with just soapy water. Avoid putting your kitchen knife in the dishwasher. The high heat and long duration can dull your edge and is especially hard on the wooden handle. Drying it immediately. Removing excess moisture with a cloth will help maintain the moisture in the wooden handle and deter rust from forming. And then storing it properly. As far as storing it properly, you can use a knife block or anywhere that the blade isn't actually in contact with anything. One of the really good ways of doing this is using a knife guard or a blade guard. And that works really good. Once you have washed it and dried it, then you can slip it into the guard, and that way the blade that you've spent time protecting stays sharp. Chefs love their knives, and these blade guards are the best protection. Another thing you want to do on a regular basis to keep your knife in good shape is to hone it on a regular basis. Now, quite often people confuse honing with sharpening, and those are two different aspects of maintenance for your knife. Honing is going to be done with a steel or a carbon rod. This particular one is a carbon rod. If you have a high carbon blade, then you need a carbon rod to sharpen it. Older knives or some of the European knives, you can get away with just a regular steel, which is just a metal rod. Now what these end up doing is they bring the edge of the knife back up again. If you were to look at the blade and the edge of your blade under a microscope, over a period of time, that very fine edge starts to curl over. You can't actually see it with the naked eye, but when you look at it really close up with a microscope, you can see that it's bent over. So the honing brings that edge back. It doesn't create a new edge, so it doesn't sharpen, but it revives the edge that's already there. So if you use your honing rod or your steel every time you take your knife out on a regular basis, that will maintain that edge nice and sharp for you for a longer period of time. Now today we're actually going to sharpen some of our knives, and how I'm going to do that is with whetstones. So I have my whetstones here, and they come in all sorts of different grit, meaning how fine or how abrasive each of those are. You need at least two, but I would suggest three. Here are the sharpening stones that I'm going to use today. We have one here. This is about a 400 grit. It is quite abrasive when you feel it, and this would only be used when you need to set a new edge. So if you have a fairly good edge on your knife, you wouldn't be using this one because this will take off a fair bit of metal and create a brand new edge. You don't want to do that all the time, or it ends up eating up your edge sooner than you would like. Knives should last for a number of years, so this is only used when you absolutely need it. The next one, this is a 1000 grit stone, and this will help give you a nice edge, and it starts to put a sharp edge on the knife, and is pretty important. Something around the 1000 grit mark is a really good kind of all-purpose sharpening stone. And then I have one here, and this one's ultra smooth. This one is, you can get them finer than this, but this one's about a 6000 grit. So it's very, very smooth. And what this one will end up doing is polishing the blade. So you've created a nice edge on here. Now this is going to polish that edge for that silky smooth kind of cutting motion. And it really is a nice way to finish your blade when you've sharpened it. Now I'm going to show you the technique that I use, and you know, full honesty here, I'm not an expert at this, but I practice at it frequently, and of course the more you practice at something, the better you get. So I just continue to keep practicing, and I'll show you some of the different techniques that I use. And before we go any further, these stones have been in water, and it allows the blade to smoothly glide across the surface. So those were in water. And one last stone that I should show you also. This is called a leveling stone, and after a period of time of gliding your blade over the stones repeatedly, they will start to become concave. And a concave stone, unfortunately, doesn't give you exact, precise control over sharpening your blade. So what this is used for, in between using this to sharpen, what we do, and it has little notches in it, but you're going to run it across the stone at an angle, and this keeps that that surface of that stone perfectly flat. We have 4 different knives that I want to sharpen. 3 of these knives are Japanese knives. This is a beautiful Japanese Santoko with a wooden handle. And then I have 2 other Japanese knives. These are both petties, which are a perfect versatile little knife for many, many jobs. And again, both of these are great Japanese knives. I'm going to give them some TLC. The Japanese knives require your angle while you're sharpening to be about 12 to 15 degrees. These Japanese blades, the edge comes down to a continuous point. The difference between a Japanese blade and a European style blade would be that these actually have, the European style blade actually has a bevel on it. So it comes down at an angle, but then it turns suddenly and goes towards the final edge. Now that's the difference between the Japanese and the European blades. So we're going to sharpen our Japanese blade at a slightly sharper angle than we will our European knife. So for sharpening my knives, I'm going to start with my 1000 grit. That's going to be the perfect stone to get our blades nice and sharp and put a good edge on them. And I like to lay a rag underneath, which gives me a little extra security, as well as we're going to be adding water to our stone as we're sharpening it. So we will have a fair bit of water falling over and it can get kind of wet. So having a cloth underneath helps absorb some of that moisture. So I'm going to start with my old workhorse of the kitchen. This is a very durable knife. It's not a very expensive knife at all, but it has done a really, really good job. So I'm going to add a bit of water to the top of my stone. And I'm going to start a forward and backwards kind of sweeping motion across the top of my sharpening stone. So I want to count how many I've done on one side and repeat the process on the other side. And during this process, I'm trying to make sure that the whole blade gets contact with the sharpening stone. So whatever you've done on one side, you need to do the similar on the other side. It's not about going fast, it's about being consistent. Adding water as we go. You can hear the sound that the blade makes as it goes across the stone begins to change. The reason for that is it's removing some of the burrs, so little metal burrs that are on the edge. Those get removed, and now you have a more definite contact with the blade and the stone as you've removed some of those burrs. That will make the sound change. So you can listen for that. And I can tell already that we're getting a bit better of an edge on there. So we'll continue this 20-degree, nice and slow and methodical. All right, so now I'm going to turn my sharpening stone the other direction. A little bit more water on there. And then we can start doing a back and forth angle. Maintaining as best as we can a consistent degree on our angle. And we'll repeat going the other direction on the other side. Just give this blade a quick wipe and we can have an idea of where we're sitting, and it feels really nice and sharp. It's got a good solid edge on it now. Okay, I'll set that one aside and we're going to continue with some of our other Japanese knives. I'm going to use this same stone to start on these. Start with a little water to lubricate. And on this one I'm doing our sharper angle, again, of 12 to 15 degrees. And whatever we do to one side, we're going to do to the other side. Trying to maintain even contact with the blade and the sharpening stone. Nice even strokes. And again, I'm going to turn it and we're going to sharpen in the other direction. Trying to maintain a consistent degree of angle. And whatever I do on one side, I repeat on the other side for that balance. Okay, so once we've done that first stone on all 4 knives, we are going to change to our 6000 grit. Now, as I mentioned before, this one is quite a bit finer, has a nice smooth finish, and it will create a mirror or polish on our edge that we've already created. Starting with some moisture to lubricate. And you can tell how fine this grit of this stone is by very little noise is actually coming off this. It's a very smooth and quiet sharpening. Consistent angle, equal and gentle pressure, and nice long slow strokes. So we've given our knives a nice wash and gotten rid of any of the residue from the sharpening stones. We'll give them a dry. And for the sharpening process, the last step for me is to sharpen it on the carbon rod. And this will again just do that very last, bringing up that very, very last kind of edge of the blade. Now, the technique I do isn't what I recommend to everybody, but it's one that I learned many years ago and I can't not do it. Again, trying to keep consistent with our angle. And that will give us our final edge that we're looking for. And this is very nice and sharp. So that's going to work great for chopping vegetables and all sorts of things. So there's our Santoku. We'll do the same with our petties. And another good technique for using the carbon rod or the sharpening steel that I like to show people is you can use a cloth on the edge of the counter. You place your steel pointing down like that and use this motion. This is much safer and is a good way to start by sharpening this way. Again, consistent angle as best as you can. So these all look great. The last thing I want to do is give some TLC to our wooden handles. Over a period of time, washing and drying, they will dry up a little bit. The wood will start to dry out, and we can recondition those by adding a little bit of beeswax, which will moisturize the handles. And we can apply this by just taking a little bit of the beeswax onto a dry towel. And you want to rub it onto the wooden handle A little actually goes a long ways. I'm probably overdoing it here a little bit. And after sharpening and moisturizing the wooden handle, our knives will be like new again. So we've got our knives nice and sharp, and they're ready to go for a bunch of chopping or whatever you might want to do. Thank you for spending some time with me and learning about how to maintain your knives properly. Again, the kitchen knife is the most important tool that you'll have in the kitchen, so it must be maintained. Thank you for joining me. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more content related to the wonderful world of kitchen skills and kitchen basics, I have linked these two videos below. Please check them out.